They thought I was too old to notice, too slow to fight back. My own blood, sitting across the table, whispering about how to bury me alive with my signature. They smiled in my face while sharpening the knife behind my back. But I've spent my life hunting liars, and this time, the prey made the mistake of underestimating me. My name is Samuel Drayton. 71 years of dust, blood, and law in a small Texas town that barely makes the map. Folks here still call me Sheriff, even though I hung up the badge a decade ago. Habit, I guess. Or maybe respect, though lately I've seen it fading when my son Caleb walks into a room. He carries himself like the town already belongs to him. He thinks the name Drayton is his to steal. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments where you're watching from. Caleb is 38, slick hair, smooth talker, a man who learned just enough charm to fool people who don't look close. He married Melissa, the kind of woman who knows exactly how to poison a room without raising her voice. Together, they built an image, the perfect couple, community leaders, the future of Drayton land, except it wasn't their land. It was mine. The ranch, the house, the deeds, every acre of dry soil I'd worked since I was young. I saw it coming months ago. The little hints. Melissa dropping papers on my kitchen counter, calling them routine documents. Caleb insisting I let him help with finances because it was too much for me now. My hands may be scarred from years of gripping a Colt .45, but they don't shake. My eyes may be tired, but I can read. They underestimated me, and that's a fatal mistake. The breaking point came on a Sunday afternoon. The three of us sat around the oak table in my dining room, sunlight falling through the blinds in sharp stripes. Caleb pushed a stack of papers across to me, smiling too wide. "Dad, this'll just make things easier. A modern will. You don't have to worry about anything. We'll handle it." Melissa leaned in with her soft voice, syrupy and false. "It's just a formality, Samuel. Think of it as protecting your legacy." I picked up the pen they slid to me. Heavy, gold-plated, not mine. My fingers wrapped around it, and for a moment I let them believe I was going to do exactly what they wanted. Caleb's grin widened. Melissa's eyes lit up, two vultures watching me twitch. But instead of signing, I set the pen down slow and looked them both dead in the eye. "You know what I learned wearing that badge for 30 years? I asked. Caleb blinked. Melissa's smile stiffened. "The guilty always show their hand if you let them think they're winning." That silence, heavy as thunder, stretched between us. Caleb cleared his throat, tried to laugh it off, but the sweat on his temple betrayed him. Melissa started tapping her nails on the table, faster and faster, like a tell she couldn't control. They thought they were predators. But I'd already marked them for what they were, amateurs in a game they didn't understand. That night, when the house was quiet, I opened the drawer where I kept my old files. Arrest reports, forged deeds, false testimonies, liars I'd taken down before Caleb was even born. My hands moved steady, pulling out folders, making calls, contacting an old friend who still owed me favors at the courthouse. I wasn't just going to stop them. I was going to let them walk straight into their own trap, smiling all the way, until the floor vanished under their feet. And when the dust settled, when the town saw what kind of leaders they really were, the Drayton name would still belong to me. The first step in any hunt is patience. You don't charge at the coyote when it's circling your herd. You wait, let it think it's safe, let it come closer. That's what I did with Caleb and Melissa. I didn't storm into their room and tear those papers to pieces. No, I let them walk out of my house that night with smug little smiles, thinking the old man was wobbling on his last legs. They had no idea I was already planning their downfall. The next morning, I drove into town. The roads shimmered with heat even at 9 a.m., the kind of Texas summer that burns your skin through the window. Dust rose behind my truck as I pulled up outside the courthouse. Inside, the air smelled like paper and disinfectant, familiar to me from decades of walking these halls in uniform. "Sheriff Drayton," the clerk said, startled. "Most folks still call me that. What brings you here?" "Need a word with Judge Hollis," I told her. My voice didn't shake. She led me down the hall. Hollis was an old hunting buddy of mine, gray hair slicked back, eyes sharp as ever. He stood when I walked in. Sam, damn, haven't seen you since Thanksgiving. What's on your mind? I laid the forged will papers on his desk. Hollis didn't even have to skim long. This isn't your signature, he muttered. Looks close, but not close enough. I leaned in, lowering my voice. They'll try to use it. And when they do, I wanted to bury them, not me. His eyes narrowed. You want me to prepare something? I nodded. A decoy. Make it look legal enough to keep them comfortable. But keep the real will safe in your vault. Hollis tapped his pen against the desk. Sam, this is dangerous. You're playing with fire. I stared at him until he looked away. I've put out fires bigger than this my whole damn life. By the time I left the courthouse, the sun was high and my truck was an oven. I drove straight to Carson's Cafe, my usual stop. The smell of bacon grease and burnt coffee hit me like an old memory. That's where I spotted Deputy Carter, young, eager, still green. I waved him over. Sheriff, he said, sitting down across from me. He always looked nervous in front of me, like a rookie who never quite outgrew training day. You ever wonder why I kept every case file I ever worked? I asked him. He frowned. Thought it was habit. I smiled coldly. Insurance. And now I'm cashing it in. I handed him a sealed envelope. Inside were copies of Caleb's debts, notes I'd been collecting quietly. Poker games in Amarillo, missing cash from his projects, a trail of recklessness. Carter's jaw tightened as he read. Your son's in deep, he whispered. He's not my son when he tries to rob me, I snapped. He's a criminal. Same as the ones I locked up 30 years. Carter swallowed hard. What do you want me to do? Nothing yet. Just hold on to it. When I say move, you move. Until then, you saw nothing. That night, back at the ranch, I poured myself a glass of bourbon and sat by the window. Crickets screamed outside, the summer heat clinging to the walls. I could see their house down the road, Caleb's truck parked out front, Melissa's shadow moving through the curtains. They were planning. I could feel it in my bones. What they didn't know was that I was planning too, every step, every detail, every word. I'd let them think they had me cornered. But when the time came, they'd realize the pen they forced into my hand wasn't signing away my life. It was signing their sentence. And hell help them when the town learned the truth. Paranoia is a hunter's best weapon. You don't always need to pull the trigger sometimes, you just let your prey spook itself to death. That's what I started with Caleb and Melissa. Subtle things. Small enough to doubt, sharp enough to sting. The first move came on a Tuesday night. I slipped a folded envelope under their door, no name on it, just a photocopy of an old arrest report. A case from years back, inheritance fraud, family member forging a will. I'd worked it myself. The guilty party ended up doing 3 years in Huntsville. I knew the sight of that paperwork would rattle them. Next morning, I watched from the porch as Caleb stepped out in his pressed shirt and polished boots, the envelope clutched in his hand. He scanned the yard, jaw tight, eyes searching. Melissa appeared behind him, whispering sharply, pointing toward my ranch house. Caleb shook his head, stuffed the paper in his truck, and drove off. Melissa lingered at the mailbox, staring down the road like she expected me to wave. I didn't move. I just sipped my coffee. That same week, I forgot to pick up a few boxes from the post office. Left them sitting in plain sight, each marked with my old sheriff's seal. Inside, nothing but blank paper. But from the way Melissa peered through her curtains when I carried them in, I knew the message landed Dad was digging into something, and it smelled official. Thursday evening, I invited Deputy Carter over. We sat at my kitchen table, the air heavy with heat and the buzzing of flies against the screen door. I showed him the forged will again, slid my finger across Caleb's shaky signature. You know what happens when a forgery comes to light? I asked. Carter nodded. Charges. At best, fines. At worst, prison. Good, I said. Now I want you to make sure Melissa hears those words. Casually. At the grocery store, at church, wherever she'll least expect it. Not from me. From you. Carter looked uneasy. You're playing a dangerous game, Sheriff. I leaned closer. Son, I'm not playing. I'm teaching them fear. That night, I made my presence known without a word. Drove past their house slow, headlights sweeping across their windows. Sat in my truck for a full minute at the end of their driveway, engine humming like a warning growl. I didn't knock, didn't step out. Just let them see the outline of their father watching, waiting. By Friday, the cracks were showing. Melissa's voice carried across the yard in the still evening air. She was shouting at Caleb, her words sharp and panicked. I caught Bit's dash, not safe, he knows, we can't risk it. Caleb stormed out, slamming the truck door, tires spitting gravel as he tore down the road. Melissa stood on the porch, arms wrapped tight around herself, scanning the dark like shadows might come alive. And that was just the beginning. The real blow was still to come, letting them taste the feeling of losing everything before the hammer even dropped. I had the legal papers ready, Judge Hollis on standby, Carter's spreading whispers through town. The noose was tightening, and they didn't even realize they'd already stepped into it. All I had to do was keep the pressure steady, one hint at a time, one seed of doubt after another until they begged for the ground to hold under their feet. And then, when they finally thought they'd found safety, I'd kick that ground out from under them. The trick with snakes is simply you don't crush them all at once. You starve them, dry them out, force them to strike at shadows until their own venom eats them alive. That's how I decided to handle Caleb and Melissa. Not with fists. Not even with yelling. I dismantled them piece by piece, finances, reputation, trust, until the only thing left was the truth they couldn't run from. My first move was through the bank. I might be 71, but I still know how money leaves a trail. Numbers never lie, even if men do. I called in a favor from Harold Jennings, a loan officer I'd known since the 80s. Harold used to hunt deer with me out by the river. He owed me more than a few favors. Sam, Harold said when I walked into his office, I didn't think you were still keeping tabs on this kind of thing. Just looking out for family, I told him flatly. Check Caleb Drayton's accounts. Quietly. I need to know what he's been doing. Harold didn't even ask why. 2 days later, he came by my ranch with a folder. We sat at my kitchen table, the cicadas screaming outside, and he slid the papers across. Your boy's in deep, he muttered. The statements showed overdrafts, loans against his truck, poker debts disguised as business dinners, nearly every credit card maxed. He'd been bleeding money for months while parading around town in polished boots, pretending he was building some empire. My hands didn't shake as I flipped page after page. Appreciate this, Harold, I said. Now keep quiet. The next step was legal. I called Judge Hollis, the same man who'd helped me craft the decoy will. When he answered, his voice was weary but steady. Sam, I hope you're not about to pull me into more family business, he said. This isn't family business, I replied. This is crime, and I want a lien filed against Caleb's property. Let it hit his desk by next week. There was a long pause. You're sure? That'll make it public. Whole town will know he's in trouble. That's the idea, I said coldly. He thought he could bury me. Now I'm burying him. The sound Hollis made wasn't agreement, but it wasn't refusal either. He knew me too well. Next came Melissa. She thought she was smarter, more careful. Her pride was her spotless reputation in church. Pastor's helper, charity organizer, the sweet smile everyone praised. But I'd been watching, and I'd kept receipts. Literally. For months, I'd noticed little things, groceries billed to the church card, luxury clothing marked as supplies, even a spa weekend in Dallas tucked between 2 conference expenses. I gathered every slip, every photocopy, and put them into a neat manila folder. Then I walked it straight to Reverend Cole. He was behind his desk, reading his Bible with those thick glasses sliding down his nose. When I dropped the folder in front of him, he frowned, confused. He flipped through the receipts one by one, color draining from his face. Good Lord, he whispered. She used the Lord's money for this? She used other people's trust, I said. That's worse. Cole looked up at me, shaking his head. Sam, you know what this'll do? She'll be ruined. She ruined herself the day she stole from the church, I said, standing. I'm just showing the congregation the truth. By Sunday, the whispers had spread like prairie fire. Folks don't keep quiet in a town this size. Melissa walked into the sanctuary in her pearl necklace and crisp white dress, but every head turned. People watched her like she was poison. She smiled, tried to hug a few parishioners, but no one leaned in. Even the pastor's wife turned away. I stayed seated at the back pew, arms crossed, eyes on her the whole time. She felt it. She knew. And Caleb? He cracked faster than I expected. Wednesday night, his truck tore into my driveway, gravel spraying, headlights blazing. He stomped across the yard, the stink of whiskey rolling off him. "You been talking?" he snapped, fists balled. People are whispering all over town. Melissa can't even show her face without getting stared at. "You behind this, old man?" I didn't stand. I didn't raise my voice. I just looked at him the way I used to look at drunks in the holding cell. "If folks are staring, maybe you ought to think why." He sneered, spit in the dirt at my feet. For a heartbeat, I thought he might hit me. His hands twitched, knuckles white. But then his nerve broke. He turned and stormed back to his truck, slamming the door so hard the window rattled. He peeled out of the driveway, tail lights disappearing into the dark. I sat there on the porch, bourbon glass steady in my hand, the night air hot and still. Every move I'd made was deliberate, methodical. Caleb's debts rising like floodwater, Melissa's reputation cracking like thin ice. One step at a time, their foundation was rotting beneath them. But I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. This wasn't just about money or reputation anymore. This was about the Drayton name my name, and I wasn't going to let them smear it. No, when I was finished, they'd wish they'd never touched that pen, never tried to trick me into signing my life away. They thought they were predators. But they'd already stepped into the trap. And I was just tightening the jaws. The thing about official papers is they carry a weight my words alone never could. You can call me bitter, you can call me old, but when the sheriff's deputy shows up with documents stamped by the court, there's no arguing. Ink cuts deeper than a knife. Caleb was about to learn that. By the end of the week, Judge Hollis had prepared the lien. A nice, clean document with his signature across the bottom. It froze Caleb's truck, the business account he used for his poker gains, even the little cabin he'd been bragging about fixing up for investment property, all of it under review, all of it locked until further notice. I made sure delivery wasn't discreet. Deputy Carter drove out in his cruiser on Saturday morning when folks were up mowing lawns and sipping coffee on their porches. He walked straight up to Caleb's door, knocked hard enough to rattle windows, and handed over the envelope. Melissa stood just behind him in her silk robe, pale as bone, while neighbors lingered across the street pretending not to watch. I didn't have to be there, but I was. Sitting on my porch with my coffee, hat tipped low, watching the whole show like I was back on patrol. Carter gave me a little nod on his way back to the cruiser. Caleb glanced toward my house, face flushed, fists trembling around the papers. He knew. He knew exactly who pulled the strings. That night, I took my next step. I called the county tax office and inquired about back payments on the Drayton Ranch properties. Not mine his. Turns out, Caleb had skipped more than one filing. I asked them politely if they might expedite an investigation. The lady on the line told me she'd be happy to. 2 days later, Melissa tried her hand at damage control. She came to my ranch unannounced, high heels clicking against the porch boards like she owned the place. Her perfume hit the air before she even knocked. "Samuel," she said sweetly, "we need to talk. This unpleasantness in town. People are saying awful things about me. You wouldn't want your own daughter-in-law humiliated, would you?" I leaned in the doorway, arms crossed. "You're not my daughter-in-law. You're the woman trying to steal my grave before I'm in it." Her eyes flickered, but she recovered fast, pasting on that same glassy smile. "You're confused. Caleb, and I only want what's best for the family." I almost laughed. "You mean what's best for yourselves?" Her voice dropped, soft but sharp. "If you keep pushing, you'll regret it. Caleb's not going to take this lying down." I stepped forward, just enough to make her flinch. Neither did the last man who forged a will in this county. You know where he ended up? A concrete cell with iron bars. Her smile cracked then. For the first time, I saw fear, not arrogance. She turned on her heel and marched down the steps, but her shoes clicked too fast, too nervous. That was the beginning of their unraveling. By midweek, the church board had suspended Melissa from her duties, pending investigation. Caleb's credit line dried up. His poker buddies vanished when they realized he couldn't cover his debts. He drove into town with his chin high, but people crossed the street rather than meet his eyes. And me? I stayed quiet, steady, the way I'd always been. A sheriff doesn't brag when the cuffs snap closed. He just does the job. But this wasn't finished. Not yet. The papers, the whispers, the humiliation, those were just the opening blows. The real strike was still ahead. And when it landed, Caleb and Melissa wouldn't just lose money or pride. They'd lose the mask they wore before the whole town. The Drayton name would be theirs to choke on. There's a certain look people get when they realize their world isn't as solid as they thought. It starts small, a twitch in the jaw, a glance over the shoulder. Then it spreads like cracks in glass until the whole damn picture shatters. Caleb and Melissa were right in the middle of that shattering, and I was the one tapping the hammer. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments where you're watching from. The lien hit them hard, but it was only the beginning. By Monday, the tax office had moved in. Letters stamped in red showed up in their mailbox. Property taxes unpaid, audits pending, threats of seizure if back payments weren't made. It was official. Their names weren't whispered in the dark anymore. They were written in ink on county paper for everyone to see. I didn't need to push the gossip mill. Small towns feed on scandal. At the diner, old men stirred their coffee and muttered, "Shame about Caleb Drayton, letting things slip like that." At church, women clutched their purses tighter when Melissa walked in, whispering behind fans. At the feed store, even the boys who used to play cards with Caleb stepped back when he tried to joke around. Isolation is a slow poison, and I was watching it do its work. But I wasn't finished with whispers. I wanted the law to circle them, to sniff the trail until it was undeniable. That's why I invited Deputy Carter out to the ranch one hot afternoon. We sat on the porch, bourbon sweating in our glasses, the cicadas loud enough to drown out our words to anyone listening. "You're sure about this, Sheriff?" he asked after I laid out my plan. "I'm sure," I said. "You think I've spent all these years keeping records for nostalgia?" "No, records are bullets, and it's time to load the gun." I handed him 2 files. One was a stack of Caleb's gambling ES, signed and dated, some from men who'd be more than willing to testify once they smelled blood in the water. The second was Melissa's receipts, more proof she'd siphoned money meant for the church. Together, it was enough to spark an official inquiry. Carter flipped through them, his brow furrowing. This could ruin them. That's the idea. By the end of the week, the sheriff's office sent an investigator to ask a few questions. A man in plain clothes, but everyone in town recognized him when he walked into Caleb's auto shop. He didn't come out for 40 minutes. Customers turned on their heels, whispering before they even got to their trucks. Caleb stood at the doorway afterward, face pale, hands buried deep in his pockets like he was holding himself together. That night, I saw headlights in my driveway. Caleb's truck. He didn't even bother knocking. He barged right in, reeking of sweat and whiskey, eyes bloodshot with rage. "You think this is funny?" he barked, slamming his fist on my kitchen table. "You're destroying me. Your own son." I didn't flinch. "You destroyed yourself when you forged my name." Melissa followed him in, arms crossed tight, her face pale and drawn. She tried her sugar-sweet tone, but her voice cracked. "Samuel, please. This has gone too far. The town is turning against us. Can't we just fix this?" "Fix it?" I leaned forward, voice low and sharp. "You mean bury it? Like you tried to bury me?" Caleb's fists clenched, his teeth grinding loud enough I could hear it. For a moment, I thought he'd swing at me, but he didn't. He just leaned down, his face inches from mine, and hissed, "You'll regret this." "You don't know who you're dealing with." I stared back, steady as stone. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with. 2 amateurs who thought the old man was blind." He stormed out, Melissa trailing behind, her heels clicking frantic against the wood floor. My kitchen door slammed so hard the frame rattled. I sat back in my chair, my bourbon untouched, and let the silence swallow the room. The next morning, things escalated. Sheriff's deputies showed up at their house with a warrant to collect financial records. Neighbors lined the sidewalks, pretending to trim hedges and water plants just to watch. Melissa stood in the doorway, tears streaming, begging them not to take the boxes of receipts and ledgers. Caleb argued, his voice cracking, threatening lawsuits. The deputies didn't even flinch. They took the papers and left. That imaged Caleb yelling in the street while deputies carried out box after box spread faster than wildfire. By evening, half the town knew. By the next morning, everyone knew. And me? I didn't have to say a word. I just kept working my land, feeding my cattle, tipping my hat when folks drove by. They all knew where the storm had started. They all knew who still stood steady while the others fell apart. But I wasn't done yet. Not even close. The legal fire was burning, but I wanted one more thing, a public reckoning. I wanted them to stand in front of everyone they'd fooled, friends, neighbors, the church, and choke on their lies while I peeled back the mask. That was coming soon. I could feel it in my bones. And when it came, there'd be no more whispers. Only truth. Only judgment. A man can take whispers, even survive official papers, but there's one thing nobody walks away from in a small town: public shame. Caleb and Melissa had been bleeding out in silence, their debts exposed, their reputations crumbling, but I knew the Real kill would only come when the whole town saw their lies dragged into daylight. A snake can slither in the dark, but in the open? It's just meat waiting for the hawk. The perfect opportunity came with the annual Founders' Day gathering. Every year, the whole town of Red Bluff met at the community hall barbecue, smoking in the pits, kids chasing each other with sparklers, speeches from the so-called pillars of the community. Caleb loved that event. It was his stage, his chance to stand tall and remind everyone he was the future. Melissa always worked the crowd with her honey smile, shaking hands, kissing cheeks. That year, they needed it more than ever. Their faces had been plastered with suspicion for weeks, but they showed up dressed sharp as knives. Caleb wore his best Stetson, Melissa her pearl earrings. They plastered on their smiles, trying to act as if nothing was wrong. I was there too, leaning against the wall near the back, a plate of ribs in one hand and my eyes locked on them. Folks whispered around me, nodding. They knew I hadn't fallen, no matter what my son had tried to do. They knew I was standing taller now than I had in years. The mayor made his speech, thanking donors, praising volunteers. Then, as tradition went, the microphone passed to Caleb Mr. Drayton Jr., who always had a few words about carrying on the family legacy. He walked up with Melissa at his side, chest puffed, and the room clapped politely. Not warmly, not like before. He started smooth, as always. Friends, neighbors, I know there's been talk lately. Rumors, ugly lies. But let me assure you the Drayton family stands strong. My wife and I are dedicated to this town, to building a future worthy of our history. Melissa smiled, but her hand shook where it held the mic she leaned in. We all stumble. We all face hardship. But family should be about unity, about forgiveness. That's when I stepped forward. My boots echoed on the wooden floor, cutting through the quiet hum of the crowd. Heads turned, whispers rising. Caleb's eyes widened. Melissa's smile froze like glass. Forgiveness, I said, loud enough to carry. That's a fine word. But forgiveness only comes after truth. The room went still. You could hear the old fans creak overhead, the faint buzz of the microphone. Caleb tried to laugh, too high, too nervous. Dad, this isn't the time. I kept walking, pulling a manila folder from under my arm. It's exactly the time. Folks here deserve to know who's been lying to them. Who's been stealing from them? I laid the folder on the podium. The top page slid out a photocopy of Melissa's charity card statement, spa weekend circled in red ink. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The pastor's wife covered her mouth with both hands. Melissa's face drained of color. That's not Samuel. That's not enough. I cut her off. I flipped the next sheet. Caleb's gambling debts. He signed in his own hand. This is where your donations went. Into my son's whiskey glass and onto a poker table in Amarillo. Caleb's voice cracked. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? I pulled out the final page, the forged will, the one Judge Hollis had locked in his vault with my signature side by side. This is what they tried to slip under my nose. My own children. My own blood, stealing before the body was even cold. The hall erupted. Shouts, gasps, people rising to their feet. Melissa backed away from the podium, eyes darting like a trapped animal. Caleb grabbed the mic, his face red, spittle flying. This is a setup. He's lying. He's always been bitter, jealous he can't stand to let go, but no one believed him. Not anymore. Sheriff's deputies stepped forward from the back of the room. Deputy Carter among them, jaw tight, his eyes never leaving Caleb. "We've seen enough," he said. His voice carried like a hammer striking iron. "Mr. Drayton, Mrs. Drayton, you're both coming with us." Fraud, misappropriation of funds, attempted forgery of a legal document. Melissa let out a strangled cry. Caleb's face twisted into rage. He looked at me one last time, his voice low, venomous. "You think you've won. But you've destroyed this family." I met his glare without blinking. "No, Caleb. You destroyed it the day you chose greed over blood." The deputies moved in, cuffing him as the crowd parted. People didn't cheer, but the silence was louder than any applause. It was judgment. It was truth. I stood there, steady, as my son and his wife were led through the crowd, past neighbors who no longer smiled at them, past church friends who wouldn't meet their eyes. The Drayton name they'd tried to steal was stripped from them, one whisper, one receipt, one lie at a time. And in that hall, under the cracked paint and buzzing lights, the circle closed. My trap had sprung, but there was still one thing left. The final cut, the part of revenge that lingers when the dust settles. And I knew exactly how I deliver it. Revenge isn't just about winning. It's about making sure the lesson burns so deep it can't ever be forgotten. Caleb and Melissa thought being led out of the Founders Day Hall in handcuffs was the worst of it. They were wrong. That was just the crack of the gavel. My final blow was the echo that would follow them forever. The trial came fast. The evidence was clear: Melissa's charity theft, Caleb's forged documents, the debts, the lies. Judge Hollis presided, his voice heavy with disappointment. I sat in the back of the courtroom, arms folded, listening as the verdict landed like a stone dropped in water. Guilty. Fines, restitution, probation, the stain of a record that no amount of smooth talk could wash away. Melissa cried, real tears this time, not the kind she used to sway church ladies. Caleb just stared at the floor, his jaw locked, that once proud posture collapsed. He didn't look at me, couldn't, but I wasn't there for the verdict. I was there for what came after. When it was over, the deputies marched them out past me. Caleb tried to keep his chin up, but his eyes flicked toward me for a split second. That's when I leaned in just enough for him to hear. "You wanted my name, son. Now it's yours on every record, every headline, every shameful whisper in this town. You wear it. You choke on it. And you never forget who put it there." He stiffened, his hands cuffed, his face pale. Melissa's sobs echoed down the hall as they were led away. The town moved on quick. Folks don't dwell long on scandal once the guilty are caught. But the Draytons? Their fall became a cautionary tale. At the diner, people shook their heads. Remember what happened to Caleb and Melissa? At church, the pastor preached sermons on greed, looking straight at the pew where Melissa used to sit. Their names were etched into the story of Red Bluff, but not as leaders, not as future builders, only as liars who thought they could outwit an old man. Back at my ranch, the silence returned. The cicadas still screamed at night, the sun still baked the earth by day, and I still sat on my porch with my bourbon. The land was mine, the name was mine, and my legacy was intact. Some nights, I'd catch the faint sound of a truck on the highway, fading into the dark, and I'd think about Caleb, my son, my blood, the boy I once taught to ride a horse, to shoot a rifle, to stand tall. He chose greed over family, lies over truth. And now he had nothing but his own shame to keep him warm. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. Revenge, when it's done right, doesn't need fireworks. It just needs silence. Silence that follows the guilty wherever they go, like a shadow that never lets go. I raised my glass one last time to the dark horizon and whispered to the night. They thought I was blind. They thought I was weak. But I taught this town justice, and justice always comes home, and with that, the circle closed. The Drayton name was mine again, forever.